This conference will now be recorded.
All right. So, any questions, guys? Firstly, any questions that we can address, and then I'll move forward into the session. So, we're looking into something like VNet to VNet peering, and we were addressing a couple of things there. So, any questions that I can take? Anyone? Any questions that I can take? Anyone? Any questions that I can answer before I move forward? All right. So, let's see. So, I the session is more going to be theory, and it's going to be a mix of, let's say, Q and A's and all these things. There are a couple of questions that were earlier asked. I will address those as well on how do you, let's say, access a storage account inside a virtual network. A couple of things out here. So I'll do that. But before I go here, let me talk about the theory. And for the practical, I have a video that is recorded because it will take a lot of time to, let's say, do that practical. So I have a video recorded. I'll share the link with you all. You can simply go there, download that video, and have a practice over, let's say, the weekend out here as such. So what I want to get into is, see, the concept of security out here. Super important. When I talk about securing my resources, right, especially my virtual machines, a virtual machine exposed or a virtual machine having a public IP is very dangerous. Uh, why is it dangerous? Why we call it as dangerous out here is because, see, the way we are architecting everything is like this. So you have, let's say, something like a virtual network. So let me put in my virtual network out here. Here my fine. Let me put in my virtual network, and when I create a virtual network, it's like I'm creating my own private space on the cloud. I'm creating my own private space on the Azure cloud out here as such, which goes ahead gives me some kind of an isolation, and which is blocking all the internet traffic. This is what I wanted. I want to block all my internet traffic and etc. and start securing things like a storage account. Probably I have a storage account out here that has, let's say, critical data. So I have a storage account setting, or I have a database that is sitting in, or you have some other resource that is sitting in out here. And you probably have something like an application server. Sorry. Guys, can you please go on mute and can you please switch off your cameras? I don't need the cameras out here. Anil, can you please switch off your camera, please? Thank you. All right, so I'm talking about now an application server. Let's say a web server that we created, or any kind of a server out here. That which is, let's say, going ahead and reading your data. So you have a data out here, and it's trying to go ahead read some amount of data from it, or or do some kind of an operation out here. So this particular virtual machine that you created has the power to go ahead and make the changes, read your data, and all these things out, because it's within the same virtual network address. So it's within, let's say, the same virtual network and so on and so forth. But if I happen to open up the public IP address for this particular virtual machine, if I happen to do that, so I put a public IP address here. What really happens now is that you start talking to this particular virtual machine over the internet, which means all your data is now exposed through this particular virtual machine to the outside world, which means I, as a user, can probably sit in a coffee shop and can connect to this particular network over the internet. I can, use that particular public IP, and I'm using the internet right now to establish a connection between my client machine, which is my laptop, and that particular virtual machine out here. And if I do that, if I end up doing that, I have a direct access into my network out here, and using that particular direct access, I can go and read my data, do whatever it is, which is a problem when you look from a security perspective. Organizations don't like this. Organizations, especially when you go into an organization, try to create a public IP address, right? Automatically, they'll send you out an email telling that, what, you're trying to create a public IP, which is not right. And they'll also delete that public IP. In the first place, they won't even let you create a public IP out here. There are something called Azure policies from a, let's say, management perspective. They go and apply policies on your Azure subscription, telling that you cannot create a public IP at all. So public IP is out of question. You cannot also have a public IP here as such. So let's leave that. I'll delete a public IP. Now, for some reason or for a lot of reasons, I as a user, which is company user, so I'm working for this particular company, and my organization is now telling me that what, you have to use your machine. You have your machine, and you need to connect to this particular, let's say, virtual machine out here. Probably is to do some administrative changes, or probably to read the data, but in a secured way. Now my company is telling, what, I cannot give you a public IP address. Forget about it. I cannot give you something called as a public IP address. So literally forget about that. You have to now go ahead, use a private IP and establish a connection with that particular virtual machine. But as we saw yesterday in the earlier classes also, if I go into a virtual machine, something like demo VM1, firstly the machine should be started. So I'll just start the machine, leave it there. This machine has only a, let's say, we'll think that this machine only has a private IP address. And using a private IP address, no matter what you do, you won't be able to establish a connection because it's a private in nature and you are coming from a public internet. So as and when you're trying to make a request out here into the private space, the network will simply block you. It'll tell you know what, I cannot allow you, and bounce your request back. And if it bounces the request back here, this is a kind of error that you get, telling that what, this particular virtual machine is not accessible. So I am sorry, you have to figure out another way out here as such. No, companies know that. Organizations, they do respect this. They do respect the fact that these kind of scenarios occur. And if I'm working in an organization, the first thing that I'll do, if you're working in a real-time environment, if you have real-time employees working, ask them. The first thing that you do when you start working, let's say I'm doing a work from home in a scenario where I'm doing a work from home right now. Let's understand that. The first thing that I do is I open up my laptop and I connect myself to a software called VPN, Virtual Private Network. It's a software that is installed on your machine. Your company can install custom softwares for it. So if you go ahead and click on VPN out here, Windows by default gives you a VPN. Windows by default goes ahead and gives you a VPN out here. You can set up your VPNs and all that stuff. But if you're working for an organization, the organization can have a tie-up with another organization like Cisco, or you have a lot of organizations that go ahead and give you something called as a VPN software. To configure a VPN software out here. So my aim here is to try and understand how this entire VPN concept really works and what is this concept really called. So if you are able to, let's say, connect to this particular virtual machine over its private IP using that particular VPN, from an Azure perspective, we call it as a point to site VPN Azure, or a point to site connection. It's called as an Azure point to site connection out here as such. This is what it tells you. An Azure point to site VPN gateway connection lets you create a secure connection to your virtual network from an individual client computer. From an individual client computer, you are establishing a secure channel. What is that about? Let's see. So the very first thing that I need to do to configure this particular VPN is that I need to create a resource in Azure called as a virtual network gateway. This is where something called as gateways comes into picture. See, gateway is like a door to any on-premise infrastructure. For example, I have a laptop. This is my on-premise machine. And if I want to establish a connection between my private cloud, which is there in Azure, which is a virtual network, and my machine, which is, let's say, in a public internet, I would need to set up something known as a gateway between them. So let me scroll this a little bit. And in between these two, I now am telling that I need something called as a virtual network gateway. Let me see if I have a diagram for the same thing. I should have one. Let's see where exactly. Sorry. Yes, this one. Yes, exactly. I have a tough time in finding the diagrams to define. It's called now a virtual network gateway resource. So gateway. This is the first thing that I need to create. And in order to create this particular gateway resource, this gateway needs to be connected to a virtual network. So this gateway needs to be deployed or connected to a virtual network out here. So if I say virtual network gateway, that's what it's telling you. I'll say add. And if I see add out here, it's telling, okay, fine, you know what? This is the subscription. I'll just scroll down. I'll give a name to it, something like a demo gateway or something like this. I'm not going to create this out. I'm just going giving a name to it and etc. I've explained the entire creation, let's say, in a separate video along with the properties of it. And here you have something called VPN and express route. We'll talk about that, what an express route is in this lecture. And there are different SKUs for the gateway. Each and every SKU will give you a capability. For example, I'll just click on SKUs. I'll say learn more. And virtual network gateway offers you different SKUs out here. So if I just go ahead and say virtual network gateway pricing in Azure, this is what it tells you that in a basic SKU, if you go ahead and do a basic SKU, one of the most important things that you get is something known as a bandwidth. What is a bandwidth? Is that very simple? See, if I'm connected to a VPN and once I connect to a VPN, I'm telling that you can go ahead establish a private connection with your network. So there is a transfer rate that is occurring between, or there is a transfer of data that is occurring between your system and that particular virtual machine out here. That transfer rate can go up to 100 megabits per second, 100 mbps per second out here. That's the amount of transfer rate that you get, and you can have maximum of 10 users. Let's see, that are included out here. So you can have, okay, let's come here. There's something called P2S tunnel. This is what I need to talk about. There's a maximum of about 128 users that can connect to your VPN gateway at once, which means that the maximum amount of systems, client systems that you can have, like me, you can have 128 users establishing a connection directly to this particular gateway out here. Okay, they can connect to this particular gateway. That is in a basic. And if you look at basic rate, it's costing you about 200 and sorry 2000 rupees, or average about 2000 rupees per month. Cheaper, not a problem. But if I just scroll down, there is VPN gateway 1, which gives you a bandwidth of about what, 650 megabits per second per second out here. There are maximum, let's say, 250 users that you can have, out of which 128 are free. 128 connections are free. After that, 129 to that 250 connection, right? This will cost you around, let's say, 80 NP per hour. Let's say I'll tell it in a 1 rupee. Let's say I'll say 1 rupee per an hour. So every user that connects, now Azure is going to charge you. And just scroll down, you have VPN Gateway 2, Generation 2, costing about what? 29,000 rupees per minute, 1 Gbps per second. The bandwidth or the transfer rate is super high, 500 users, but from 129 to 500, it's costing you around 1 rupee per minute. And if you just scroll down, the maximum available here is a VPN Gateway 5, which is costing around 2,20,000 rupees per month. This is super high, 2,20,000 rupees per month, which is giving you about what? 10 Gbps per second. It's super fast. Like, if you download a movie using that particular VPN, right, for a Blu-ray print, which is about 4 GB or 5 GB, it'll take about 10 or 15 seconds out here to download the entire movie. It's that fast. The bandwidth is that fast, and 10,000 users is the maximum limit. Again, 128 are free. After that 128, you're still going to get charged. So 2 lakh rupees plus every hourly charge is what this occurs. It's a very costly resource. And also you have data transfer rates and all these things out. And gateways also come up with something like zone redundancy, availability zones. So you have multiple instances of your gateway that is created in the background. In case the primary region goes down, you have your gateway running from a different region out here as such, because this is now your entry point to the entire network. You're establishing a users are establishing a connection and so on and so forth. And if you look at this, let's say I take a basic. and I have generation 1 out here. It's asking me what is a virtual network. It's very importantly asking, telling me that, okay, fine, you know what, can you give me the virtual network out here? It's saying no existing items here because my region is Central India. I don't have a network in Central India. Let's say East US2 because that's where I have a network, and I'll flip it to basic again. And it's saying can be associated with these particular networks out here. If I put this network, what it requires is that within the network, it needs a subnet. It needs a subnet out here. Reason being, your gateway scales up and scales down. There's an auto scaling that occurs in the background, and whenever it scales up and scale down, it needs spaces in your address space, or it needs spaces in that particular subnet out here. So if I go back into my virtual network out here, let's move into virtual networks and let's get our virtual network out here. There is something called subnets, and if you see this, if you see this, there is an option to add the subnet, and just beside it, there is an option to add what? A gateway subnet. At max, you can only have one gateway subnet per a virtual network, which means you can only have one VPN gateway per a virtual network out here as such. So if I click on gateway subnet, do you see I cannot even change the name of the subnet. The name has to be gateway subnet. It's a reserved name. The name has to be gateway subnet, and you can have your address spaces depending upon how much of scaling capacity that you need. You know, you can have 256, or you can occupy a larger space, or you can occupy a smaller space out here as such. You can have a space out here, and you can say save. And once you save this, you can use that particular virtual network, and let's flip it again and let's do a couple of things out here. So once this is created, it will automatically identify that yes, there is a gateway subnet, and I'll go ahead and use that particular gateway subnet out here. It will automatically pick up that yes, there is a gateway subnet that I'm able to see. It'll take that gateway subnet, and it will try to create your VPN gateway resource within, let's say, that particular virtual network. So let's go back and let's wait for this particular resource to be created, and let's see what all happens out here. So now if you see, do you see what are the available what are the available IPs in my default subnet? 249, because there are two virtual machines that are attached. So 251 minus 2, it's 249 out here. But in the gateway subnet, do you see what are the available IPs? Scaling depends upon the dynamic use, meaning it depends upon your gateway. It depends upon how your gateway is scaling, how it's scaling down. It depends upon that. I cannot give you a number. It's dynamic usage out here. This is now controlled by Microsoft on how your gateway scales and etc. Now, if you go back, I'll just again change my resource, sorry, the region out here so that it can identify. I can say this one, and automatically it's taking the gateway subnet out here. You cannot change this. It's automatically taking the gateway subnet, and very importantly, guys, it needs a public IP address. This gateway will have a public IP address. So it's attaching to the virtual network, and it also has a public IP address which is static in nature. A static and a standard public IP address is what it requires out here. Your question can be that, you know what, you're not giving a public IP there, you're giving a public IP here. Isn't that exposing the security of your organization? No, it's not. We'll talk about how it's not. We'll talk about, let's say, how it's not. How is it different from directly attaching a public IP to, let's say, your virtual machine resource out here? So it's telling you need to create a public IP. It's a static public IP. You do not have, let's say, the option to change it to, let's say, dynamic. It's a standard public IP, and you can tell, let's say, it is zone redundant, and then you can go ahead and, let's say, do a review and create. Now, as and when you fill up all these details and do a review and create rate, it's going to take somewhere around 30 to 35 minutes in order to create this resource. It's that big resource. It's a very big resource out here because there is a scaling, there's a lot of components that you're really looking at. In order to properly configure, in order to, let's say, create this resource, it'll take about 30-35 minutes out here. After this resource is created, I now need to tell who all can access this particular resource over a public IP, or I need to tell who all can connect to this particular gateway. How can I tell that? is by using something called as a certificate based authentication. Certificates, these come into picture right now out here. What do you mean by a certificate is very simple. Just think about it like an authentication that is given to you by a company. Let's say you have companies which are called CS, certificate issuing authorities. They go ahead, create certificates for you for your organization, or your organization can also create the certificate for itself, and they give you the certificate. It's going to look something like this. They give you a certificate. What I do is that as a part of configuration of my VPN gateway, I take the data of this particular certificate and give the data out here and place the data out here. I've also shown how to do it in a demo and how to create a certificate and use the data. And the same certificate data or the same certificate out here is configured in each and every of your individual machine. So when you join an organization, right, the IT team of your organization is going to configure all the certificate and give you the machine directly. They'll say, okay, fine, you have a certificate right now, and all the machines that they ship out, meaning all the users, will be using this particular certificate. It can be shared, which means now, in order to even connect to my VPN software, when you connect to establish a connection to the VPN software, so let's take a simple client machine. Let's remove these connections and let me put it in this way. So now, as a client, if I'm now trying to establish a connection with my VPN, let's say with the VPN device, my laptop will try to, let's say, talk to this particular gateway. My laptop will try to talk to this particular gateway over a secure channel or over a secure TLS channel out here. This is called as a transport layer security. Or in let's say if I were to give it in a very layman term, this is called as an encryption, or it's called as an encryption channel, which means when you talk to a machine or when you talk to a resource, what your laptop will do is that it's going to send across something known as a data packet, which contains information. If you pass it over the internet, it can be tracked, it can be hacked. There are hackers who use different kind of softwares now to see what is the data inside it, which is not right, or which is, let's say, unsecured. But when you are using this particular virtual network gateway and when you're using a VPN, right, all your data packets that you send are going in an encrypted format. When I say encrypted format, it's like even if you hack that data, you cannot really unlock it out. You cannot really, let's say, look at that particular data out here. It all this data is encrypted. It is decrypted at the destination, meaning the VPN gateway has all the key with it. It'll take the key, decrypt your data, send it to your network, then send it to your machine over the secure channels out here as such. This is how a VPN gateway actually works. Now, this is the theory of it. I've also, let's say, explained the same thing in practice and how to do that. And I'll share the link with you all right now. So let me go there and let me send across the link for you all. So let me do that real quick. And let me also show you all how to use it out. So let me go there and let me get this out. So I'll send this link across. And my request, guys, to everyone who are online, please take this link and send it across in the WhatsApp group so that people coming offline can have a look at it. And guys, if you are not able to get this link, if people are not sharing it, please let me know. I'll send it over the email or something like that. Okay, I'll help you all with the same thing. Once you get this link, please go here. It's an open link out here. It's an open repository link. Please click on this link. You land on this particular page, and you have this particular video in an MP4 format. Just click on this, and here you have a download option. Just download this out, and this will tell you how do you configure it out, and also There's a readme there's a readme.md file out here. If you go here, I've also given you the link to the documentation telling how do you go ahead use the documentation, and there is a step where you need to generate something called as certificates out here. I've also given that step out here as such, and I've also tell you a common error that you face, especially when you configure a basic VPN gateway. Basic is very minimal gateway out here. Again, there's a common error that you face. Please look at it, and I've also given you the error screenshot on how it looks like. The error will probably give you something like this, telling that a connection attempt is made and it's not able to connect and all that stuff. For which I've told you how do you go ahead and let's say make this out, how do you make it work, and so on and so forth. Now this demonstration, right, to go ahead and configure this out, it's going to take a good amount of time. It's going to take a lot of trial and errors attempt out there in order to establish a connection. Please try this out, please watch this out, and let me know if I can help you anything with that. So this was the theory. I've tried to summarize what exactly that I've told them in a much more detailed format in order to let's say tell what is the advantage of a VPN gateway and how exactly it would work, and what would you get here from a VPN gateway out here. Such. Yes, any questions that I can take till you?
Yeah, a couple of questions,
Good,
Kiran.
please.
So we talked about redundancy, right? If it is a
Mm-hmm.
standard. So basic
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have any redundancy. Is that correct?
Uh, you mean the basic gateway
Gateway.
out here?
Yeah.
Basic gateway also does have a redundancy. If you go ahead into the basic, it does have a redundancy. So, oh, fine. So it doesn't have its own redundancy. Yes, it doesn't have a oh, okay, fine. It doesn't have its own redundancy. Yes, that's a disadvantage of it. But it still occupies your subnet space because there is something called enable active mode. So if you
Okay.
enable this out, right, what happens is that you can still go ahead and say that okay, fine, this is my primary gateway, and then I have a secondary gateway out here,
So
and
in that
it
case,
does.
you need to create two connections, is it? Two gateway
Yes,
network.
yes. You need to create two gateway IPs. You need to have, let's say, two gateway IPs. You just need to
Okay.
tell what is a gateway IP. It will create the second gateway for you. It will have a second gateway for you out here. And what it does is that instead of doing a horizontal, it will do a vertical scaling. It
Okay.
will have
Yeah.
a very small scaling, but inside the same region. It's not going to, let's say, span out across the availability zone. It's only going to, let's say, have it inside the same region. That's the reason it will go ahead and occupy the entire subnet, and you cannot let's say go ahead and create an entire subnet out here as such cannot be selected when activated. Yes, I mean you cannot have an entire, again, even if you see this, it's an active mode also is not supported out here in a basic
So it
SKU.
is only active passive,
Yes,
maybe, right?
it's an active passive mode is what basically it supports. It doesn't have
So
a active
mhm.
mode. Hmm?
In that case, if it is passive, I mean, who are going to, let's say active goes down, for example, the
Mm-hmm.
tunnel goes down. A
Mm-hmm.
passive, someone has to enable it, right? Or will it
Yes,
enable automatic?
you have to enable a failover again. It's a manual work
Mm.
that you have to do. And that's the reason when you talk to a company, when you talk to an administrator out there in a company, right? We don't normally go for a basic SKU at all. Basic SKU is just for let's say sandboxing or just for testing instances out there.
Right, right.
But when you
Let's
really
say
look
it
at
is a standard, right? Yes,
Mhm.
in standard active means, I mean, active passive is also available, right? I think in that case, will it
Yes,
automatically fail over?
it is active. No, active passive is not available. If you look at it, it's an active mode that basically it gives you. So if you look at this, let's see, where is that instance? Find this or instance properties and all these things out. And if I disable, okay, fine. So let's see the SKUs basically that I have, and let's see if I can enable a active mode. So it's an active mode that it gives you. So again, if you see this, the SKU have to be something like VPN gateway 123 AZ, and then these are the things that actually supports this
Yeah,
out.
that is an
Mhm.
option. If you disable it, will it become active passive or
Yes, there's an option. As in, yes, it's if you disable this out, yes, it's an active passive mode that you have.
okay? Then in that case, okay, this also uses the BGP. Okay, right.
Yes,
Hi,
So
Kiran.
it doesn't use the IPsec, right? I think.
it does give you an IPsec connection. So I did not let's say really go into let's say what is an IPsec tunnel and all that stuff. But if you look at the point to site connections out there, this is an IPsec tunnel basically that you have. So it's a
Point to site.
P2S.
Mm.
Yes, it's a point to site. But when you configure the tunnel, you can tell what kind of an IPsec configuration that you need. Or when you actually go
Okay.
into the configuration out here, it will give you multiple options in order to let's say take the kind of tunnel that you need out here as such. So if you just
So
scroll down,
another, yeah,
if
I
you
will
see
read
this,
that. I mean,
an
another two
IPsec
questions
tunnel.
is
Mhm.
we said, I
Yes.
mean, TLS
Yes.
connection through the certificates, right? Is it 1.2 or any idea? I mean, what is the version? Because
Uh,
it is 1.2 is getting deprecated.
yes. I mean, again, the version deprecation, those are taken care. I mean, right now it should be 1.2 out here. It should be a TLS session 1.2. But as and when the deprecation happens, as and when you have a new version out here that is coming up, Microsoft is going to go ahead and, let's say, implement those things. And the reason that I just gave it as an encryption tunnel, not going into the details of it, is to make sure that everyone really follows that out. But in the background, if you see, it's an IPsec tunnel that gets established between your
No,
client
this is
machine.
site to site, right? I mean, this is site to site VPN. It's
Even
an
in a
IPsec
point to site,
point.
you still have an IPsec tunnel out here. So even in a point to site, so let's see, it's a VNet connection. But let's go ahead into, so even in a point to site, right? You have a
Yeah.
P2S tunnels, and even these are IPsec tunnels out here that gets established.
SSTP tunnel. I don't know what is it. What is
Hmm.
SSTP?
I'm not too
SSTP
sure
tunnel.
about the terming conventions out there. I'll have to, let's
Okay.
say, look up, these tunnels. Again, these are, very pure solid networking concepts. Like, the if you go into that, these are pure solid networking concepts out here. But the only thing that we need to understand is that the channel is encrypted. The connection between your client machine and this channel
Yeah.
is actually an encrypted channel out here as such.
And this one VPN gateway, it doesn't use the routing remote access, right? I think in this case. So point to site.
Point to say,
So
sorry, can you come again with your question, please?
there is a service called earlier routing and remote access.
Mm-hmm.
So what we do is before the cloud, right? I was talking before the
Okay.
cloud.
Okay.
So we used to create the routing remote access. We enable routing remote access, and
Okay.
then that
Mm-hmm.
that becomes the VPN machine. It is a server
Okay.
basically. So and you configure two network cards, one internal, one external facing. You give their public IP
Got it.
address to the external,
Mm-hmm.
and clients will make a connection, and then they get the IP address from the pool of the subnet pool,
Right.
right?
Right.
So is that
Right.
the same concept is being used here in the gateway VPN gateway?
It's kind of similar. I mean, it's not exactly the same that you basically configure two NIC cards and all these things out, because
No,
the
no, no,
routing here
not the
is
NIC cards. I mean, here also we have two NIC cards. Like one is the public, another one is the private.
private NIC
So
card.
one
Yes.
for
I
the
mean,
IPNet and IPVNet and
mhm, mhm,
VNet, and other one is for the client external.
correct. Correct.
So it is the same,
Right.
but does it use the same service? I mean, routing remote access, because it is maintained by Microsoft, right?
It's maintained by Microsoft. It might not use the same routing mode. I mean, I'm not really aware of the on-premise route. I mean, the before cloud, the on-premise routing route that you were talking about. So I'm not too sure about that. But yes, you can configure an address pool telling that this is the pool from which your clients can, let's say, source out their addresses
Get an
out there.
IP address. Yeah, yeah. No, that is a
So
subnet
each
that what we are giving, right? From the subnet, it will
uh,
allocate the IP
no,
addresses.
it's not the subnet that you're creating. Your subnet can see, if you see this, your subnet is of this particular address. Your subnet can have a different address. Your client pool can have a different address out here, wherein you're telling that this pool of private IPs can have an access to your virtual network. So this is another pool that you're creating. It can be something like a 172 address, or it can be a 192 address, class B and class C. And this is not coming directly from your subnet. It's a different address pool altogether. If you see this, even this one,
So where
this
do
is
we
an address
configure this
pool.
address pool? In
So
the
this address pool,
VNet?
yes, not in the VNet. When you create this particular, let's say, VPN, when you create a point to site VPN out here, I'll just scroll down, and I don't think you have the configuration diagram out here, but if I could show you, I mean, I've explained that on where do you configure it out in the video recording that I've given. Let's scroll down into the technicalities. Let's see if I have say point to site connection. Next steps, configure a point to site connection. Okay, let's do one thing.
Oh,
Let's
yeah, yeah.
say
You can see radius authentication, right? I think it uses the same
radius
thing.
authentication is the certificate basically that you give. But
Mm.
let's say create a point to site connection Azure. And if I have a demonstration that they kind of give you, this is the steps. Yes, and just scroll
But
down
that
if
we
you
need to configure, right? That pool, we need to configure it.
we need to configure the pool. Yes. So if you just scroll down, this is what I was telling. So this is your VPN gateway. Once your VPN gateway gets created out here, right? Once you go inside your VPN gateway, generating the certificates and all these things out, do you see it's telling adding the VPN client address pool?
Hmm.
And once you have the virtual network gateway, you can go into something called point to site configuration and configure this particular address pool out here. And this
Okay.
is this is telling in the address pool box, add an IP address range. VPN clients dynamically receive an IP range from the address range that you specify out here. So the minimum subnet masking here is a 29-bit and for an active passive, and 28-bit for an active active configuration.
Okay.
Yes, any more questions here, guys? Okay, sorry, not this one. Yes, any more questions? Let's see the chat window. Let's see, VMs created, but it's saying that the
Right.
amount of the VM per an hour is even for a free account. Yes, it would say, because even for a free account, it would go ahead and charge you from the free credits that you have. So, it needs to deduct some charge, right? So that charge is going to get deducted from, let's say, the free credits. Same applied for VPNs as well. When you say same applied, yes, your charge is going to get deducted from that one. If you have a load balancer present between two VNets, in that case, how does VPN really works out here as such? Now, again, very importantly, when you talk about a load balancer, you if you talk about an external load balancer, which is a public facing, then you wouldn't need a VPN out here, because it's an application that you're exposing out there as such. So before that particular load balancer, I mean, before you even divert the traffic to that load balancer, you can have your own firewall and then divert the traffic. But if you're talking about an internal load balancer, internal load balancing occurs between, let's say, two machines or two, let's say, devices in the same network. Like I can have a machine, I can have a database, I can have an internal load balancing mechanism inside the network. But I'm not talking what is happening inside the network. Inside the network, routing is actually taken care by Microsoft out here, because it's all goes out over, let's say, the Azure backbone. I'm talking about what is outside the network. How do I establish a connection outside the network, a secure connection outside the network out here as such? I think someone else had a question. If I can take it, yes.
Yeah, Kiran. Actually, in it's a
Hmm.
VPN, it's automatically changes right within the time interval of 30 seconds like that. Every time it
When you
changes, right?
say it's a time,
IP.
when you say it changes, the IP you mean?
Yes, yes. In VPN device, I
Uh,
have seen that every 30 seconds it changes, right? You given the standard, that means it's a static. It's never change, right? When you given standard.
Again, when you say changes, we need to bit a little bit be specific about it. It's the client IP that gets changed. It's the client public IP address that you're talking about inside a VPN. That's different. But when you connect
Okay.
to it, when you connect to this one, this IP that you connect to, or this IP that your system tries to establish a connection to, this is always static. This is always constant. Now, when you're telling your IP changes, you're talking about a client machine. And the client machine, public IP address, yes, it can change. This is something that I cannot really control. But I'm not really looking about the public IP address out here. I'm looking about the private IP pool that let's say, giving you out inside a VPN. So you have your own pool of addresses when you configure the VPN. This gets dynamically assigned, but your VPN just checks whether is it from the same pool and does it have a certificate. Good enough. So this can be dynamic. This is always static. So when you say it is dynamic, right? It's not showing you the IP address of the VPN gateway itself. It's showing you the IP address that you on a client laptop are connected to. So two different things out here as such. Does that answer your question, Lokesh?
Actually,
Yes.
Hmm. Go ahead, Ramakrishna.
Kiran, so RSA token basically it will change every 30 second means that's the RSA token number, right? Once it is connected, VPN is connected, then the IP will not change, right? Until it's
The,
disconnected, it will not
No,
change.
that
the
is
public
MFA
IP
actually.
address might. The public IP might. See, because your system is connected both to the internet and also in the backend, it's connected to an intranet. Now, the public might change. The public is something that you cannot really control on. That's a dynamic range, right? It might change. The private will not. Even if
Yeah,
the private does change, even if it does change for some reasons out there, your VPN will not break, because even though it changes, right, your IPs are going to get assigned from the same address pool that you configured inside, let's say, this particular VPN gateway out here. So it still maintains that particular session. So it has that particular session always. That I mean, it always has that particular tunnel out here. That won't break. That's what I kind of meant.
See, what happens is when for the initial connect to the gateway, right, from the clients,
Hmm.
it uses the
Hmm.
public IP of the VPN gateway to connect. Once it
Right.
makes a connection established, right, that session establishes, automatically the client machine will become part of your
Extended network, exactly.
internal
So
network, right? So if you
it's nothing
do the
but
IP config/all after connection, you will see a private IP address from the pool getting assigned to the client.
assigned
You
to
know,
the client machines, exactly. So what happens really is that I am just extending my network out here, and
for
even I'm getting my
initial
client
connection,
machine.
you use the public IP. It doesn't matter. I mean,
Yes,
client IP address changes or whatever happens. Once
Yeah,
it
it's
makes the
through the
VPN connection, it
VPN
is.
is connecting, right, Kiran? Through the VPN. It's normal even in on-premises, like, if you want to access our email, so we have a RSA token which we will use it and we will access our organization email. Similar
right.
kind of.
Kind of. When you say RSA token, so you're connecting to a VPN and you're giving an initial token out here. Instead of a password, you're
Correct,
giving a token.
That
correct.
is a
And
multi-factor authentication, actually, what you have
multi-factor
to go.
authentication. In yes, in some cases, companies would say, okay, fine, you know what? Use a password plus, let's say, the token that is coming, let's say, from your mobile device, or you can have a USB that is connected to, let's say, your network. It's an MFA that they implement for additional layers of security, that what if your password is exposed, you still need to have, let's say, have an RSA token, or let's say some kind of an authenticator app to go ahead and authenticate you out here. So that's the connection that you make from this device to the gateway. And once you have a
Authentication.
connection secured to the gateway, everything else is now kind of taken care out here as such. Yes, go ahead, please.
Yes, correct. So the gateway, the RSA token, whatever we are providing the certificate and all, it's for gateway only, right? To
Yes.
establish that connection.
No, I
Hmm.
think no. I think see the
Hmm.
gateway connection is established uh, through the certificates in this case. Once you
Yes,
make the
through.
once you make the connection to the gateway, right, and then
Hmm.
comes the MFA. There you will enter either Microsoft Authenticator or Google Authenticator or RSA token, whatever, to get authenticated and get
See
into your
again. Just to stop you there. See, what can happen out here is this also, like, meaning, even before you establish a connection to your gateway, there are VPNs. I mean, it's all a VPN model that you kind of implement. Let's say you have a VPN software that might require you to do a pre MFA, a pre multi-factor authentication. Meaning, see, when I connect to a gateway, in let's say in my case, using a Windows VPN, if I connect to it, it's not going to ask me any password, nothing. It's just going it's just going to verify whether whether my certificate is there in place. If it's there in place, it's just going to go ahead and, let's say, establish out. Companies might enforce a pre MFA while you're even connecting to a VPN. Why? See, this is a certificate that my organization is, let's say, configuring it to me and installing it in my machine, in the client machine. What if your machine is stolen? I can also ask a question: what if your machine is stolen and the person who stole your machine knows your password, but he doesn't have the MFA, or he doesn't really get the OTPs out there as such. So even when you do a connection to the VPN software, you can implement the Microsoft. I mean, you can implement, let's say, a multi-factor authentication out here. You can do that. That's what Ramakrishna was mentioning. Yes,
network. Yeah,
it just depends upon the authentication model that you establish out here as such.
right. A simple example is for Azure portal also you can do a MFA. Like
Yes,
you
we
will
can do
enter username and password, and also then comes the MFA. If you
MFA. Yes,
set that, that is a second level of authentication.
correct. That's the second level of authentication that you have. Yes, you can have multiple layers of authentication that you can establish on either the VPN or at the Azure portal level. Multiple things out here as such.
So one question, Kiran, the certificates managed by VPN gateway. So
Hmm.
let's say I'm setting up for the first time, right? All the environment
Yeah.
for my organization, I'm setting it
Hmm.
for the
Hmm.
first time. So the
Hmm.
CA, how the certificates are given to the client machines as a
Okay.
first step.
So for the client machine, so there are two things that we have to look at. So I was just generalizing this terminology called certificate out here.
Mhm.
But when you actually talk to a CA, they're going to give you two things. One is a root, the parent certificate, and then you can generate something called as a child certificate from this one. A root and a child certificate. What I do is that when I start my journey with, let's say, the cloud, probably I don't have a VPN at this point. I don't really have a VPN and so on and so forth. I don't really do that. Okay. What I can do at this point is that I can create a certificate, have it in place, and I can let my CA manage whether the certificate expires, how the certificate expires, and all that stuff. And when I create, let's say, this particular VPN, because when you're talking about really cloud resources and you're talking about your machines, of a project, right? These are the first resources that we actually go ahead and establish, even before going ahead and giving you, let's say, the connection out there. These are the first things that we actually lay down. Once we lay down, we go ahead, take these root certificates and give a child certificate to my IT team, IT administration team out here. They would now go ahead and start configuring all these things. Or if you already joined the organization by then, you do not have a child certificate, they would say, okay, fine, you know what, I'll give you an update. Your client would say, oh, sorry, your IT team would say, you know what, I'll give you an update out here. Let me go ahead and install this out, and then they'll help you connect with this. So until this is done, you won't be able to, let's say, establish a connection to VPN at all. You'll still, be getting errors telling that, you know what, your certificate doesn't match up. You do not have a certificate data and so on and so forth.
No, I have an example actually, so that's the reason why I was asking. So there is in our scenario, we have an IIS server, Internet Information
Okay.
Server, right?
Okay.
So that has to be on HTTPS. So
Okay.
we deployed certificate on the IIS server. Okay, we went to
Okay.
IIS management and we
Okay.
requested certificate and we installed it and configured. Right
Okay.
now the clients which are locally connected in that network, so they
Okay.
will go and access https://abc.com.
Okay.
So the clients doesn't have the certificate. So how are they going to understand this is the
Okay.
HTTPS and make connection to the IIS server, that website?
See, there are two different things that we're talking about out here. Now, this certificate is something that I'm talking specifically about a VPN. This
Right,
certificate needs to be in place if you want to
right.
connect to the VPN. Now, what you're telling is that, let's say you have a website called google.com.
Mhm.
This is a HTTPS.
Yeah, that is
Agreed?
HTTPS. Yeah,
It's a HTTPS out here, right? And this certificate, right? When let's say a CA gives you a certificate called HTTPS certificate out here, this is a public facing certificate.
correct.
So my client machine, whoever is trying to go and connect to google.com, doesn't need the certificate to be in place. So if I say google.com, this is automatically secured. So if I just go and copy this link out, it's a HTTPS link that I normally get here.
Correct. How it is authenticating or how it is trusting your computer?
See, here the HTTPS, when you say, when I go ahead and, let's say, use my browser out here, in
Mm,
the back end of my browser, there are cache cookies and all that stuff. The
correct.
certificate out here is cached inside my machine. So the certificate is just given to my machine so that a TLS session can be formed between that particular, let's say, client machine over a browser. I'm just forming a TLS session. So when your browser makes a connection for the very first time to a website, it first goes ahead and gives it telling that, okay, fine, this is my certificate, these are my cookies and all that stuff. Now take this, and now your browser just tells, okay, fine, you know what, yes, this website is like good. I've downloaded the certificate out here, and this is where your session gets established out here as such.
If it is a new machine, right? I mean, then it doesn't have any cache and nothing. No, I mean, it is a plain.
It'll try to generate, your browser will try to generate. That's what I was trying to tell, is that,
Okay.
see, these are two different things out here. Now it's a new machine, yes, this machine cannot connect to a VPN, agreed. But when you say it's a HTTPS website that is published over the internet, I'm talking about publishing over the internet out here, then your browser will come into picture. Your browser is going to, let's say, help you out in order to, let's say, cache that particular certificate out here, because this HTTPS is a public facing certificate. This is something that we have to understand. So if you look at this
Correct.
one,
Correct. I
if you
mean,
go into
I'm talking about a private IIS, right? I mean, it is
Then
it's
why
not
we are
publicly exposed.
then
for the private IAS, you have to get inside the network.
then I think why we are discussing this concept, actually it's totally different, right? These two are totally different, right? Whatever we are discussing, it's a gateway, and HTTPS is nowhere concerned about here, right? Nowhere
Yes,
related.
HTTPS is nowhere concerned, but the question here is that if I have a HTTPS certificate for a private IIS machine, then how is my, let's say, laptop going to, let's say, really function? Now, if you're talking about a private website, that's a different factor altogether. That's a different point altogether. Reason being, you have to be inside your network. So for you to be inside your network, this has to happen. All this has to even primarily happen out here. And once you're inside the network, your machine now is telling, okay, fine, I've already authenticated right now. Now give me the certificate. It's going to go ahead, download the certificate out here, and then go ahead and, let's say, establish a session out here as such.
Okay. Okay, Kiran. Thank you.
Two different things we're talking about.
Yeah,
HTTPS is a different thing, but this is a different thing. This certificate that I'm talking about
correct, correct. I
is
got
not
it.
an SSL. Mhm.
But in case, I mean, our VM is IIS, it can be possible, right? So then how does it make connection?
Could be, for which you need to be inside the network. That's what I was telling you. You have to
Okay.
be inside the network because you're talking about a private IIS VM.
Yeah, yeah, got it.
Yes. Any more questions, guys?
What is the validity time for one certificate once you create the certificate?
Uh, I'm not too sure about that. I'll have to check that out. Usually, certificates come with a 1 year validity period out here, but I can check that out and I'll let you know. Especially with, let's say, these certificates that you're generating, I can check that and I'll let you know about that. Usually, it's a 1 year period, and also you have a contract with the certificate issuing authority. You can also tell them what is the validity period, when you want to extend it, when you want to renew it, and all these things.
You need to pay for that, right?
Yes, you need to pay for that. You need to pay for these particular certificates out here. But in a demonstration purpose, right? You can go ahead, create your own self-sign certificates. You can also do a self-sign certificate out here, and you can use it for a demonstration out here as such. Yes, any more questions, guys? Anyone? Any more questions out here? And now, please go through this one on how do you, let's say, go ahead and configure, let's say, your certificates out here. That's something that I want you all to go through. And one more thing that I want to address is that someone earlier had a question that, what, I have a storage account. We configured a storage account and we secure that storage account within a virtual network. Now I'm not able to access the containers or the blobs inside it. I'm not able to, let's say, really looking into the containers and all that stuff. Now that's the reason I was just waiting for this particular session to complete in order to, let's say, establish the entire thing. So for example, let's say I have a storage account, and if I just go and create a storage account right now real quick in a location like ECS2, let's say demo RG, I'll just go ahead and do that. I'll say sample storage demo USEs2, and we'll just go ahead and create an ECS2. And while I'm creating it out, I'll also integrate this particular storage account with my own virtual network. I'll say demo vnet, and I'll just go ahead, take the default subnet. Again, I cannot select a gateway subnet out here. Gateway subnets are only reserved for a virtual network gateways out here. You cannot, let's say, take this out. Say data protection is all good. So review and create this out. So what I'm doing while creating the storage account itself is that I'm deploying the storage account directly into, let's say, my network out here. So someone asked this particular question earlier. So I wanted to just address this out. And when I'm creating this out, now it's secured inside the network. Now, if you have to, let's say, go ahead and talk to this particular storage account, you have to be within the network, meaning you have to be within this particular VM. If you go inside this VM, you'll be able to see the data of the storage account. And for you to even get inside this particular VM, now you have to, let's say, when you're coming from an organization, you have to have a VPN connection that is established. And once a VPN connection is established, you can get over the private IP address and talk to that particular storage account over a secure network or over, let's say, the Azure backbone out here. So if I wait for this particular, let's say, resource to be created, and if you see, it's firstly integrating it with the virtual network, securing your entire storage even before it's created, and then it'll go ahead and, let's say, create my storage account. Once it's created, though I have the containers, I won't be able to look inside the container over a public internet. This is something that I cannot do. That's the reason I have a virtual machine created. From this virtual machine, you can go to portal.azure.com, establish a connection, then go inside the machine out here. And in order to even get into this particular virtual machine, right now I'm using a public IP, yes. But in order to even get into this particular virtual machine, right, you'll have to go through all these things and then come here. That's how we talk to resources like a storage or like a SQL database and so on and so forth. So this is what I was telling. So once this is created, I'll also show you the same thing out here as such. So this question was asked earlier by someone. I'm not too sure about who asked this question. Yeah, we can see by whitelisting the IP. It is right. I agree with you. We can whitelist the IP and we can see it. But what my concern is that why are we even whitelisting the IP addresses? Now, if I go here, if I whitelist the IP, then there is no point of me going ahead and securing the resource, right? So what really happens in an organization is that again you have policies out here which will restrict you to whitelist your IPs. You put your IP out here, save it out, it will fail. Doing that, you know what, you cannot whitelist your IP on a storage account because it has critical data, it has sensitive data. So if I go into my containers right now and try to look into my container, it is going to try and throw this particular error out here. The reason being, now you are forced to get onto this particular machine, and this machine is in the same network as the storage account. So now if I go into this particular machine and go into portal.azure.com and establish a connection, okay, this is not a supported browser. Let me go here. Yes, it's a Microsoft Edge, and let's say classes Azure DevOps at the gmail.com. So I'm doing the same thing what I'm doing on my machine, but right now I am inside the VM, and if I'm inside the VM, if I'm inside the VM right now, it means that I'm inside the network, inside my own private network. And let me go ahead and try establishing a connection out here as such. And it should be a multi-factor authentication if I'm not wrong. Let's see. Let's see, never. Okay. What this is, let's see, class Azure DevOps at gmail.com is good enough. Let me try to establish a session out here. Yes, I will get an email probably to go ahead and let's say give me a code out here. Let's refresh this out and I have an email. So I'll take this out. It's an MFA that is protected to my Azure account for the very first time if I am logging from a different device. And once I verify this out, I can now get inside my Azure account, but now I am over, let's say, this particular virtual machine. If I come here and if I now go into, let's say, the containers, and this should probably allow me out here as such. So now I can go and upload, download whatever content is there inside that particular machine, inside that particular container out here. I can do that, provided only when I'm on, let's say, this particular virtual machine. If I have to be on the virtual machine, I'll have to do all that, let's say, VPN establishments and all these things out. And from the internet, I'm not really allowed. I'm not really allowed to go ahead and let's say establish a secure connection. And just to extend this concept, if you have multiple virtual networks, meaning for some reason you have also created virtual networks in different regions, and then you establish something called as a peering. And when you do a peering, there was an option called gateway transit. There's an option called gateway transit audio, which means that resources that are present in these particular networks can also talk to your on-premise machines over this secure network or over this particular secure channel out here as such. They can transfer the data, they can share the data out here as such out there. This is what VPN as a concept really gives you. Again, there are multiple things in VPN, like right now we are doing a point to site VPN connection. There's also called as a point to site express route, and express route is much more complicated, wherein Microsoft, you can tie up with, let's say, Microsoft, you have multiple partners, and you can lay down your own network cables between your own data centers in, let's say, a cloud out here as such. So multiple things out there, but let's focus right now on, let's say, the VPN gateway. Let's understand what VPN connections are. Let's try this out. And please, once you get inside the VPN on a private IP, please go ahead and start, let's say, looking at the data of your storage account. See if you're able to, let's say, connect to that and so on and so forth.
Gateway transit
Yes,
allows
any
both ways, right?
questions?
From the client to other network, other
Yes.
VNets. And
Yes, it allows both ways. Hmm?
okay.
Yes, anyone? Any questions here?
Kiran, any interview point of questions on this virtual networks? Any kind of document is there?
I think I've shared it out already, but if I did not, uh, here I have Azure storage is starting with this one, and then I have infrastructure as services, and I have, let's say, multiple interview questions out here, and also the documentation links that I provided here out here. And I'll keep updating this document over a regular period. And then the next topic is PaaS, and then Azure DevOps, and then Terraforms and all these things. So I just send across these questions, and you can go ahead and have a look at it.
We missed that one. Can you ping? Yeah.
Yes, I just posted it here.
Yeah, Kiran, we
You
got it.
can
Thank you.
bookmark this.
Thank you.
Yes.
So
Any
all
more
your
questions, guys?
questions you covered here, right, Kiran? If we go through here.
Correct. Yes, all the questions are covered here, and I'll keep updating this document over a regular period of time.
Okay. So,
Yes, any more questions, guys? Right, so that's it from mine today. We'll meet tomorrow and we'll start with automation. So we anyways have automation, right? So we'll continue with automation and then we'll look at multiple concepts out here starting from Monday. Okay. Thank you and have a good day ahead. Thanks, guys.